and welcome to the Convex Conversation with me, broadcaster Helen Fospero. Today's guest was a member of His Majesty's Diplomatic Service for 24 years and became one of the most accomplished crisis experts in the Foreign Office. Ian Proud was at the heart of the emergency response to 9/11, the Bali Bombing, earthquakes, tsunamis, and the Salisbury assassination attempt on a Russian double agent and his daughter using a military-grade nerve agent. On Boxing Day 2004, whilst head of the political section in Thailand, Ian was in a cinema in Bangkok when he was called about severe flooding in southern Thailand. He drove 9 hours to Phuket to oversee the initial on-the-ground response to the devastating Indian Ocean tsunami, which killed more than 225,000 people from 14 countries, one of the deadliest natural disasters in history. The experience, not surprisingly, still haunts him, and it's led to him writing a novel called Searching, a Love Story. Ian, it's really wonderful to meet you in person. Before we explore your book and get on to the serious matters of crisis management, etc., I hear that you're a Strictly superfan and you are sitting in the very seat that reigning champion Carlos Ghosn sat in a few weeks ago.
Carlos is a complete legend, and what an amazing win with Karen last year. It's fantastic to watch their progression throughout the competition. I was in Bangkok for 4.5 years, and actually throughout Asia, Carlos is from China. Ballroom dancing is incredibly popular. So while I lived in Thailand, it is a hobby that I took up. I had about 4 hours of lessons every week with a teacher. And when I came home, my mum was terminally ill. I looked after her for a year. And then after she died, I wanted something to do after work in Whitehall and went to the Civil Service Ballroom Dancing Club and met my wife. And that's how that all started. And of course, as a family, including my now 12-year-old daughter who's dancing mad, we're all big Strictly fans. Even my son, he sits on the sofa at the far side of the room, but he pretends not to watch, but he's secretly into it as well. So all 4 of us. I think possibly the dog as well.
We did attempt a few salsa steps actually here in the studio, but I was telling Carlos that I went to Shanghai a few years ago and I was taken into a local park. And everybody there who was ballroom dancing were probably in their 90s.
Yeah.
That arrived in wheelchairs, lifted out of wheelchairs. And I was told as a blonde Westerner to prepare because I probably would be invited to dance by an elderly gentleman. And there was just something really freeing and beautiful about it. Do you find it just really relaxing?
It's really relaxing because you're in partnership with a woman or a man and you're just together and you're lost in the music and the movement. I particularly like the waltz. That's probably my favourite dance, and there's that togetherness about it. It's not really an individual pursuit, it's something you do as a team. I think family is really about teamwork too, and of course it's just good exercise too. If you do the jive or something crazy like that, it's good exercise as well. So you get so many benefits from it. You feel great afterwards. It gives you so many opportunities as well in life, I think. So I'd recommend it to anybody. And of course, definitely watch Strictly. And I'm really excited, by the way, about the new presentation lineup.
That'd be interesting,
I'm not quite sure
won't it?
how Josh Widdicombe has got chosen to be a presenter, but I can't wait to see it.
I think it'll be great. Hard act to follow, Tess and
Very.
Claude.
But then Brucey was.
But Brucey was too, exactly. And we'll all get the hang of it, won't we?
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I think Carlos is excited too, and you'll be pleased to learn that he's every bit as lovely and gorgeous as he comes across on television. He was a real joy to interview, and what an amazing talent as well.
He's such a character. That's
he's
what I
an
like about
amazing
him.
character, and he walked in head to toe in vintage charity clothing, looking so cool. And his backstory, of course, coming from a remote village in northern China, where boys
indeed.
don't really dance, was quite something. Anyway, we're here to talk about your story today. Tell us a bit about Searching. I've got a copy of the book here, Searching, a Love Story. Tell us a bit about the story itself and what prompted you to write it.
Well, I've wanted to write about the tsunami for a very long time, and I've not really known how to write about the tsunami. And for a long time, I thought maybe I'll do a non-fiction account of it. But then as time went on, that felt less relevant and timely. And in the end, I just wanted to write a love story, actually, about 2 people who were so desperately in love that their relationship was tested by PTSD, which I suffered after working on the tsunami, almost a breaking point, and they have to work their way through it. And it's about workmates, a girl from the northeast of England, a guy like me from Hampshire, and they just meet at work and they have this connection and things get in the way, but then they connect just before he goes on holiday to Thailand, and then everything suddenly changes after Boxing Day when he's there with his father. His father goes missing, presumed dead, and it's he searching for his dad. They're both searching for real connection and true love in their lives, and it's about their journey together as a couple through the good and the bad and out the other end.
How did it help you putting pen to paper? I mean, I know you considered something more like a memoir, but has this still been very much a healing journey for you, telling their story and their love story in a fiction way?
It's the most important thing I'll ever write, and I've written a lot. I write articles every day about various geopolitical things, but it's very real to me as a story. They are fictional characters, but the opportunity to sit there at the keyboard and work through the emotions of suffering from PTSD, how you can feel really isolated, how it can affect your relationships with other people, was a very emotional part of that process, but emotional in a good way in terms of my healing journey, very much so. But then there's the light and shade. The pure love story bits right at the start of the book were just wonderful to write, just allowing myself to get lost in two people who just fall in love and want nothing else than to be with each other for the rest of their lives. Really old-fashioned, classic thing. So that helped too. And it's been hugely healing. And I'm not really a crier, but I mean, I've probably cried more writing that than probably my whole life, actually.
You mentioned your PTSD, and early on in our conversation, I was going to ask you a bit about it later, but you brought it up now. Do you still suffer from PTSD in all these years
I don't think you ever fully recover. For me, it was the alcoholism and nicotine addiction and all sorts of self-sabotaging behaviours, cutting yourself off from social connections, including at work, feeling that everybody doesn't like you and feeling unable to talk to people about stuff, just feeling completely lost in your life and having no purpose or direction. I don't think you ever fully recover from that. Now, I'm incredibly blessed in my life now. I've got a wonderful wife. We've been together now for 16 years this year, but actually we met 17 years ago. We got two beautiful kids. I have a great life, but I travel quite a bit and I have to be quite wary not to sink into bad behaviours like drinking too much if I'm on a business trip and that sort of thing. It's always there in the background. I don't think it ever completely goes away.
And you've found ways to manage it too, haven't you? I think one of the ways has perhaps been inspired by the Buddhist faith and is something that we see in the book as well. A journey to temples, that's helped with your healing and recovery, I think, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And most of my best friends, I still have some incredible friends in Thailand. They're, of course, Buddhist. I'm a Christian. But during that time, having those friendships, I had more Thai friends than British friends at the embassy because I cut myself off from the diplomatic set. I was working, but not really connecting with other people there. But my friendship group was Thai people. And they'd take me to temples, and just that letting go, sitting in a temple on a cool floor, just clearing your mind, focusing on your breathing, was very helpful to me then. And that also helped me with my faith journey. My wife, Catherine, she's always been a very committed Christian. When we met, that was one of the things that appealed to me about her just innate goodness. She was like a magnet. I wanted to be close to her to kind of soak up that goodness because I was so troubled and grizzled, if you will. But going to temple, and of course they're just beautiful as well. All these Thai temples are absolutely stunning.
Are they really breathtaking and very beautiful spiritual places to be in?
They are. They're incredibly beautiful. They have these really steeply angled roofs with really kind of ornate woodwork and gold and red and colour paintings and beautiful Buddhist sculptures inside and fragrant from incense and jasmine inside and teeming with people. But once you step inside the sanctuary of the temple itself, it's very calm. You just sit there on the floor and clear your mind. It's just got everything. It's so beautiful. And I speak fluent Thai, and I had a trip out before I started my posting, and I went to the Grand Palace, which has Thailand's highest Buddhist shrine inside of it in Bangkok. And there's a Haagen-Dazs cafe, and I wanted some ice cream, and the menu was in Thai. And I was looking at the menu thinking which flavour I should choose, and I sort of mouthed out the word. I said, chocolate. It's quite funny, but incredibly beautiful. I recommend the Grand Palace, the reclining Buddha, everyone knows, but Wat Arun, which is the Temple of the Dawn, which you can't miss, which features actually in the book as well.
Tell me a bit about the Temple of the Dawn, because it does feature in the book, and I think Monty and Hattie go on a boat journey, don't they? Which I think you've done.
Many times.
Yes, tell me a bit about that.
So it's this enormous Buddhist stupa that when you look at it from the river, because you approach it on a river taxi, it just looks like this enormous stupa pointing towards the top. But when you get close to it, it's covered in all these tiny bits of mosaic. And it almost looks like from plates that have been cracked and they put the pieces into these quite fine mosaics, covering the whole thing. And it's surrounded by smaller temples that you can go in and worship in as well. There's a fantastic pad thai restaurant that my friends took me to as well, just in the street behind it. It's really old-fashioned Bangkok when you get there. Of course, in the temple itself, you see lots of tourists, but you're stepping into the old capital of Bangkok before the new bit on the other side of the river really started. So there's so much to it. And it's just the contrast between this grey, imposing-looking thing, but close up, it looks really impressive and colourful.
Did you love living in Bangkok?
I did, because Thai people are really wonderful. Thailand has this impression of being really about the rougher end of tourism, but actually Thai people are socially very, very conservative, and they're wonderful once you can make a connection with them. And that's always rooted in respect. If you show respect to them, particularly if they're older to you, their seniority to you, their culture, that takes you a long way. I speak fluent Thai as well, which goes a heck of a long way in terms of building connections. I left 18 years ago, but they're still like family. My 86-year-old dad visited again with his partner earlier this year. And they said to me after my mum died, we'll always take care of your dad. And, it's making me quite emotional.
Oh, that's so nice. That's what a lovely thing to say.
They take him everywhere.
That's so kind.
And I left 18 years ago, and they try and pay for all of his meals. He always has a big fight about paying for meals. They take him all over the place. It's incredible.
That's wonderful. Take us back, if you can, to Thailand 2004. What sort of things were you doing there for the British government?
I was the head of the political section, and we also covered economics. We also covered transnational crime. We covered refugees. So it's a very, very complex country. We had gang glitter during my time there, stuck at Bangkok airport. We had terrorism in southern Thailand on the border with Malaysia. I used to cover that, providing support to the Royal Thai Police. I used to visit the Burmese refugee camps to the west quite a lot. At that time, about 150,000 refugees fleeing Burma, Myanmar, as it's known these days, from Karen Hill tribes and other kind of hill tribe groups. I spent a lot of time in the refugee camps. We had bird flu. We had a military coup while I was there. There was always so much to follow in Thailand, and it was endlessly fascinating and busy job. And then, of course, you have the monarchy element as well. I had Prince Andrew come out to visit, all the stuff that's been in Andrew Laney's book, in which I feature, actually. So there's all sorts of stuff going on all of the time. But that's what made it a fascinating job. These are the places you want to go to because they are so complex, multi-layered and interesting. And it was an endless fascination, and challenge.
And is that why do you think you ended up being a diplomat? Because you're tackling all these kinds of incredible issues and sorting things out?
It is. I grew up in Germany. My dad was in the British Army. I come from a very working class family. I didn't even go to university full time. I was bullied as a kid. But actually, after I started work for the Hampshire County Council, the Hampshire Police then sponsored me to study for a degree part-time. And I saw the fast stream graduate entry brochure for the Foreign Office. And I thought, that looks perfect for me. I like politics. I grew up overseas. I like foreign people. I like learning foreign languages. This is perfect for me. But I thought I didn't have a hope in hell's chance of getting this job, quite frankly. But I went at it. I gave it my best. And luckily I got through the process at the first attempt. And my parents were so thrilled as well that this bully kid who bummed out of his A-levels had actually got into the most prestigious graduate entry scheme in the UK. I think it slightly shocked them, shocked me, but yes, we're also delighted.
A prestigious 24-year career, which has only come to an end in recent times. But just focusing to begin with on the tsunami, tell us a bit about the emergency call that you got on Boxing Day. You were in the pictures, weren't you, watching
I went to the
movie?
Pictures, yeah. It was early in the morning. I got up, decided to go and see a Thai movie. And on the radio, I'd heard that there was severe flooding. That's all it said in southern Thailand. That's the first that I heard about it. And it's only about 30 minutes into the movie and my mobile phone starts buzzing. Pick up the call, coming to the embassy right now. The ambassador needs to have a meeting straight in. It was just 5 minutes down the road from the cinema. And the ambassador explained, David Full was still in contact with, so had lunch actually quite recently, what had happened. Very little information. All the airports were closed because of being used exclusively for military and police helicopters and that sort of thing. And of course, I've been involved in the Bali bombing response 2 years before. And the government had been completely hammered, rightly so, because we sat on our hands for 2 days waiting to see what had happened, leaving English people and British people stranded in Bali. About 32 Brits were killed in the Bali bombing, for example. We were rightly criticised for that. I said, well, we can't just sit here. We just need to get in the car and drive. And there's hardly any staff around. And he looks around the room. He says, do I have any volunteers? And the consul, he held up his mobile phone. He said, I'm duty officer in Bangkok, so I can't go. I said, well, that'll be me then.
It was a long way, wasn't it?
And we had a
drive.
police escort the whole way.
Did you?
900
so
kilometres
900
non-stop.
kilometres?
Yeah, 9 hours.
And when you got there, Ian, I don't even know whether you can describe what greeted you at that stage. It's very difficult, having seen television footage, to imagine the scale and the chaos.
Well, we arrived in the middle of the night and I was setting up the office. We had this empty furniture showroom that a British expat community member kindly let us use. I sent everybody out, including the ambassador, while I was sorting things out on the phone, calling in help from wherever I could get it from, stayed up all night, worked 40 hours. But I didn't actually get out to see the real carnage until day 3, because I spent the first 40 hours basically standing everything up with what limited resources we had at our disposal. So I went down to Grubby on the 3rd day because we knew that the hospital was rammed there, filled with young people, injured people, several hundred bodies being collected there as well from the beaches. So that was my first sight of it. And the hospital, which I think is described in the book, was just utter chaos. And you can't imagine the pressure of having so much to do and just having me, one British colleague, a Thai colleague, and that was it, to respond to everything. But I remember you get these moments of light that come through. A dad worried sick about his daughter had got through to the deputy head of mission, deputy ambassador in Bangkok, saying, she's in Grabby at the hospital, you need to find her. What are you doing? Everybody is criticising us already by that time. And he gets through to me and he says, you've got to find this girl. So I did. So I found the girl. I got on the phone to her dad. That was super emotional, but it's lovely because, yeah, daughter speaking to her dad. But then she told me that she'd been with 5 other girlfriends from university backpacking. 3 had gone to Phuket. Another was in Grabby, and she'd seen the 6th one die under the wave. And that girl's parents came along 3 days later, and I was able to talk to them and provide a bit of support. But the fact that I knew the name of their daughter who died was I wouldn't say it was a comfort, but it was helpful to them in some way that their daughter just wasn't another name on a spreadsheet, that somebody from the government actually knew her name, was thinking about her in some small way. But yeah, the smell, the body collection sites, hospital, it was pretty grim, I'm afraid.
And what resources can you draw on? I think I read somewhere, and perhaps in one of your articles, that there was scant staff on site while the confirmed deaths were clocking up into the thousands.
Yeah, I think it hit 5,300 by the end in Thailand. By the morning of the day after, it's already in 2,000, rising all the time. And we had 14 staff on the ground at that point. And we'd learned after the Bali bombing that we should deploy these things called rapid deployment teams. We just fill a plane with staff, which is what the Australians did, actually. And we just send them there. And if there's too many, fine, we can bring them home. But you can never really have too many in that sort of situation, right? London sent some people to Sri Lanka, sent nothing to Thailand. So we left on our own, begging and borrowing staff. And we had a couple of staff from the embassy in the Philippines been on holiday, came in to help. My predecessor was on holiday and he came in to help briefly. Guy came up from KL. Delhi sent about 6 people to help us. We were begging and borrowing staff wherever we could. But the Thai community in Phuket was fantastic. There wasn't a lot practically they could do on the consular side of things, but it was a small bits of help letting us use this furniture showroom. They had this taxi service so that because we'd finish at 2 in the morning and we'd have the shift system, and they'd always have somebody who would come and pick us up and take us to our hotel any time of the day or night. They couldn't do too much for us. It's just tremendous.
You often see, I think, in disaster areas or when something dreadful's happened, humanity shines through. We had a coffee before we came to the studio and I told you that I'd witnessed the towers come down on September the 11th from my fire escape when I was a broadcaster. And I'll never forget the kindness in New York after that. People would line the streets as the amazing firefighters were heading to Ground Zero, and they were handing out bottles of water, homemade sandwiches. I'd always found New York a really wonderful and a very welcoming place for a young Brit who'd never been there before. But everything just changed in that moment. And do you find that through some of the disasters you've been involved in, the human kindness often really shines through and strikes you? It
really does. There's a scene in the book where a Thai family come and give Monty some food and a bottle of water. Well, that actually happened to me, for example. But there was a buddy system in the hospital that I could also mention that was very real. Young people who were not injured or only slightly injured would shuttle around the hospital offering to help in any way that they could. The handing out free telephones, that's mentioned, that was something that really happened. The Thai people couldn't do too much. The foreign people who were there involved couldn't do too much. The local expat community, everybody just stepped up in those times. And it was tremendous and heartwarming to see, because all these concerns about somebody's race, religion, culture, sexuality, none of that matters in that sort of situation. The only thing that matters is that people are suffering and that you can, in a small way, do something to help. And people do, and it's wonderful to see.
When you suffered post-traumatic stress afterwards, can you pinpoint what triggers that? And I hope that doesn't sound a very naive question, but was there anything in particular that has just really gone on to disturb you? Or is it the whole picture? Because there was so much sadness, there was so much loss, so much devastation. This was a natural disaster. I just wondered, because you're not used to seeing things, but you were in a job where you were at events like the Bali Bombing. And so is there something that you think, actually, that's what really disturbs me or triggers a post-traumatic stress response, do you think?
So for me, I've always been quite clear that it was the feeling of being abandoned by the government, that we stepped up to help, and it wasn't enough help. And we all know that it wasn't enough help, that we didn't have enough people helping British people and other people affected by the event. But everyone that was there did their best, and the government did their best to not support us and then throw us under the bus when press came calling after us afterwards. And I felt very, very let down by that, actually. I've been honest about that within the Foreign Office. I just published an article in the Association magazine. So it was that for me, the feeling of being let down. Of course, when you've got the press hounding you, you can understand that. When relatives are unhappy with the service, you can understand that too, because you know they've been let down and you feel bad about that. Of course you do. But when your own ministers are also just abandoning you as well, that was very, very toxic throughout the organisation and very hurtful. Things like seeing their bodies, that is tough, obviously, and some of those images haunt you, but they kind of blend into the background a bit. But it was dealing with the grief, dealing with the parents who came out looking for their daughter, who I know had drowned, for example. And I saw so many staff have nervous breakdowns at that time, including an American psychologist they sent down to help us because he couldn't cope with the emotional strain. But it was out of a sense I always thought, and I knew a family friend, a police family liaison officer, who suffered exactly the same thing. People are so desperate to help that they crash up against the reality that they can't make somebody feel better in the most devastating situation like the loss of a loved one. And that creates such an emotional burden on them that it cracks them. I had a colleague who looked after two young children who'd lost both of their parents after the tsunami. And that just broke that colleague because they were helpless. It's that feeling of helplessness which can really, really break people. But for me, it's the helplessness of doing everything and then just being completely abandoned by the government, the country that I stepped up to serve.
I do remember that there was a lot of heavy criticism of the British government at the time and the response. In what way did they throw you under the bus? Was that more about just not providing the support that was clearly needed out there?
Well, they went in, and you see this in the response to anything that goes bad in government today. They deny and deflect and try and polish a bad story rather than saying, look, we were wrong and our staff did their best, but we didn't do enough. And that's all that they had to say, but they didn't say it. They tried to polish a bad job as, oh, we tried our best under the hardest circumstances and can't please everybody and that sort of thing. And the head of the diplomatic service only really mounted a staunch defence of his staff 1 year after the event in the Times. And I sent a full-word email back to him saying, at last, well said, which went down apparently very badly. I mean, I thought I was quite diplomatic. But.
And do you think Whitehall hasn't improved much? Do we still see those things going on with other situations?
All the time, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
It's about personal responsibility. Yeah, I can take responsibility for the fact that we failed. And I know that we failed because we didn't have enough people there. And I can admit to that. And I feel bad for the families that we let down. And I genuinely feel bad because I've seen some of these parents who've lost loved ones. I've seen people in the hospitals. I've seen the bodies and all the rest of it. But it's that unwillingness to take responsibility for their actions. And you see in recent, you look at the Mandelson appointment as the ambassador to Washington, and it's number 10's inability to take responsibility for what was just a really bad job. And actually then to try hard to polish it up as a good job. And it's that I think it's a culture within Whitehall. It's not just at the ministerial level, it's also at the senior official level too. And nobody likes making mistakes, right? Nobody likes to admit they got it wrong. Of course, I understand that. But sometimes you just have to put your hands up and say, look, we really messed up. It was our fault. We're going to take responsibility for this. We're really sorry. We'll do anything we can to try and resolve and improve the situation in the future. If we just said that more often, and we don't, we just don't.
I think the public would appreciate that much more. It's so transparent when there's a cover-up going on or everybody's trying to blame somebody else. Just say, we didn't quite get this right. Yeah. We'll do better next time. But it would go much further, I think, for honesty and authenticity and trust, I think, which is so key. We mentioned September the 11th. It's hard to believe it's 25 years on. What was your involvement in 9/11?
So I'd actually been in DC right before I flew back on the night of 9/10. I'd been to the Pentagon, I'd been to Langley, the CIA, I'd been to Fort Boning, the Defense Intelligence, I'd been to the State Department. I'd given a talk up at Cornell University in New York State. And I flew back, and I was head of the Indonesia department at the time, the largest Muslim country in the world. And I flew back to watch events unfold, and I quickly got sucked into the consideration of the intelligence assessment after 9/11. That was my kind of main role. I must stress at this point that this was in the pre-sexed up phase. This was before Alistair Campbell sexed up the intelligence dossier to justify the illegal war in Iraq in 2003, just to be completely clear about that. But that's what I did. I looked at the intelligence about what had happened and who was responsible and that sort of thing.
You've done so many different things in your career. One that always intrigues me is the Salisbury poisonings. For those who don't recall that story, just remind us what that was, and then will you explain your involvement in it?
So this is Sergei Skripal and his daughter visiting him in Salisbury, and he is a former GRU, Russian military intelligence spy, who was swapped out and moved to the UK, obviously aided by MI6. And we gave the Russians back one of theirs, I think, at the time. And then 4 months before the World Cup is due to start in Russia in 2018, somebody tries to kill him with a military-grade nerve agent in the centre of Salisbury by spraying this nerve agent onto the door handle of his house. And of course, him and his daughter succumb. We know that also Dawn Sturgis in Amesbury later succumbed as well, if you recall that case too. And they almost died. And of course, we came to the view, and it's a view, without going into the details, it's an assessment I continue to share, that actually the Russian state was behind this, either explicitly or a vague element within the Russian state. That's always been my assessment. But that triggered this massive diplomatic tit for tat between our two countries. Firstly, the UK kicked out 23 people that we believed to be undeclared intelligence officers from the Russian embassy in London. They kicked out 23 of ours. I was due to go in July anyway, so they kept me as a 2 for the price of 1 offer, if that makes sense. We'd had a whole bunch of new diplomats coming in January, and most of them just went straight back to the UK, so they kicked out 23 of ours. They then did a double whammy by kicking out another 76 staff within a month by capping our numbers at the embassy. So we had hardly any staff there.
This was in Moscow. You were at Moscow at the time,
being
weren't you?
Followed around non-stop wall to wall with close surveillance everywhere I went in the city. All sorts of intelligence fun and games being thrown at me on the streets of Moscow, being followed in my car. But we then had the Football World Cup coming. We had hardly any staff.
You never have staff, Ian.
I never have staff. After the tsunami, I'd spent 3 years making Moscow the best prepared embassy to deal with any sort of event like a big World Cup. We got thousands and thousands of England fans. We're thinking maybe there'll be a terrorist bomb. You never know what sort of crisis you're going to have to deal with. But the key is to make sure that you're prepared to deal with anything. And the embassy in Moscow was prepared for everything. So even after losing so many staff, we were able to stand up at an operation to support the World Cup, which thankfully went smoothly without any bombs. But it was just a mad time. It's like crazy on so many levels. And, you know, the hardest thing is the small things. You have the period when you're waiting to find out if you're going to go. I never thought I was going to go because I was going to go anyway in the summer. But you're waiting, you're nervous about it. But it's the kids. My kids were still quite young then, and their parents had got kicked out, and just explain why they were having to leave to London in 6 days and never see them again, or at least not until we went back. It's things like that. One of the guys at the embassy, he was gay. He had a Russian boyfriend, and knowing that he would never be able to visit Russia again for at least 5 years, he was in tears and just giving him a hug and manhandling him onto the minibus as they were setting off on the drive of shame up to the airport.
I'm guessing, do you speak fluent Russian too, as well as fluent Thai?
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah.
Can you give me a little sample?
Я говорю по-русски, да. Русский язык уже 4 года уже. No, I've studied Russian for 4 years already. I speak Russian so quite well.
You must have a real brain for languages, I think, because some of the languages you speak, I think it's perhaps 6 or 7, is it? But Thai and Russian, I would imagine
Thai. I mean, my
difficult.
Thai, I speak Thai like a native.
Except when you order ice cream. So have you just got that kind of brain that you get
so.
it with languages?
I think it's curiosity. If I go to any country, you're curious to find out about the people. I always want to learn a new word in any new country of the language. It's just curiosity. I think if you're curious about the people, the places you visit, then you'll want to find out about their language, their culture. And I think it's that curiosity that's gone missing a lot from modern society, where we're just not curious about the people around us, and we can imprison ourselves within these silos, and we're just not interested. We're not trying to find out about the people around us. So people get labelled because they're Jewish or because they're Muslim, and everybody gets put in boxes rather than actually trying to understand. And language is a great way to understand people. And I say, when you can tell a joke in a foreign language, then you cracked it. I knew the guy who ran the Olympic gymnastics school in Rostov-on-Don. He was twinned with Glasgow before the war started. And there's a Russian saying, vodka bez piva, деньги на ветер, which basically means drinking vodka without beer is like throwing money on the wind. And he always used to try and get us drunk by applying us with loads and loads of vodka during our trips down to Rostov-on-Don. And I came up with vodka without friendship is like money on the wind. Just vodka bez дружбы, деньги на ветер. And of course, his whole family fell about laughing that I'd twisted this old Russian saying and used it for my purpose.
I think sometimes when you go somewhere new, even if you've made an effort, I've just done some work in Turkey, and even just being able to say teşekkürler as thank you, or günaydın. In fact, I left a Turkish restaurant at the weekend. It was the afternoon, but the only other word I could remember, having impressed them with teşekkürler, was günaydın. So I left and smiled and said günaydın, knowing it would amuse them, because that's all I could think of. But even just saying a few words, it sends a huge message, doesn't it? That you're curious and that you're interested and that you respect that person's culture and you want to feel part of it. It's such a simple thing to do, especially with Duolingo, which I hear you're a bit of an addict on Duolingo. Is that true?
I've just today hit 1,000-day streak.
Have you? What are you learning on Duolingo?
I'm doing French at the moment. I don't know why. I just fancy getting back into my French.
Into your French. Just finishing on Moscow, I think you were senior officer at the British Embassy, weren't you, in Moscow? It was from mid-2014 to early 2019. That was a time, wasn't it, when the UK-Russia relations were particularly tense. What was that like, navigating that time?
It's just incredibly complex. The Ukraine crisis had started. Our diplomatic relationship was getting further and further into the chiller. Russia was subject to all the sanctions. Just navigating all the different ministries in Moscow was very, very complicated. They insisted on speaking Russian, which was fine. I can speak Russian. They're totally fine. But all the avenues to dialogue were slowly closing down for us. And I don't think we were helping either by refusing to engage at a ministerial level with the Russians, because the problem is that Russia is a big, angry country. Whether we agree or we don't agree, it feels that it's under pressure from Western nations. And that is just baked into their mindset. It goes back to the Second World War. It goes back to Napoleon's invasion in 1812. So, I mean, that is just part of their psyche, this feeling that we are a threat to them. Now, we might think Putin is a fantasist and all those things, and maybe he is, but they have 6,000 nuclear weapons and we don't. And they're not going to go away. And I think too often our policy has been driven by wishful thinking. If we just apply a bit more pressure, if we could just keep the war going a bit longer, we're going to break Russia. We're not going to break Russia. If I believe that we could have said, have at it, but we're not going to. Our policy is guided by wishful thinking, and that started back in 2014, where we decided that the best form of diplomacy was not talking to your enemies. Well, actually, diplomacy isn't about friendship. It's about talking to people with whom you most disagree, and that is Russia. And I think even today, we completely reject engagement with Russia, but we have to talk to them to resolve this terrible war in Ukraine. There's no other way. And the writings on the wall in terms of all the rising nationalism we see in the UK, in Germany, in France, I think part of that is down to a feeling that actually we've got these leaders who try and play a big role on the global stage and are actually starting more wars than they're ending. And of course, Putin, started the war in Ukraine. We all understand that. But we should be trying to end wars, not carry them on. I think ordinary people suffering cost of living crises, they're getting fed up with this and they're saying, well, actually, we just want to kind of live in peaceful coexistence. And Russia is Russia, we're Europeans, we're British, whatever, but let's all try to end these terrible situations that have killed or injured over 2 million people since 2022. It shocks me that we're not trying harder to bring the war to an end, that we're still guided by this belief that we can somehow win. It's bizarre.
We interviewed General Sir Nick Carter, former Chief of the Defence Staff, and an expert like you are in geopolitics. which is way above my understanding, really, and pay grade. It was about a year and a half ago, and I said to him that I'd had a few sleepless nights worrying about the state of the world and should I be worried or could he say anything reassuring? And he said that he felt we were living in the foothills of the 1910s and the 1930s, and went on to explain very eloquently he couldn't actually reassure me any further. When you look with your diplomatic mind and your experience and your understanding of geopolitics, the state of the world, really, Trump, America, Ukraine, everything that's going on, the rise of nationalism, what's your assessment of where we are now? I feel we're in a very sorry, sad and disturbing place.
We're in a very worrying place right now because the West is no longer able to impose its rules, its will on the wider world. China is growing. Russia is still the largest nuclear superpower in the world. It's an energy-independent power as well. And the US has shown that it's no longer got the military might to impose Western rules-based order on countries that don't like our rules and don't want our order. And I think that's what we're seeing right now in terms of Trump's failure in Iran. There's no way that he'll be able to polish that as a success. I'm glad they're reaching some sort of diplomatic settlement to this, which in any case is probably going to cause a global recession. But the world is changing. This so-called unipolar moment, when after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was one single superpower, and that was the United States, that set the terms of how states around the world should behave, has ended. And that has been proven in Iran. That has also been proven actually in Ukraine, where we're flailing around trying to maintain a war that we should really be trying to stop, because actually the people suffering most are people in Ukraine, and the people who will suffer most in the future will be the people of Europe as we creep towards a generalized war in Europe, which I feel we are headed towards. I'm afraid to say I can be no more reassuring than Nick Carter on that.
No, it's sad times, isn't it? And do you feel frustrated in a way as a former diplomat that you can't fix it because you speak such a lot of common sense, and often we don't hear much sense from politicians of all different parties these days?
Yeah, diplomacy is not about friendship. It's about finding ways to coexist peacefully without killing each other. And it's really as simple as that. We just need to recognise that we can no longer impose our will on other nations. We're no longer the big kid on the block. The UK is now a middling power with a chaotic political scene, with changing prime ministers every 5 minutes. We can no longer set the terms on other countries, and we have to re-engage in diplomacy. And I think we've departed from that, unfortunately, and we can't change the countries that we don't like. We just have to accept and try to resolve conflicts, not prolong them.
In a thoughtful moment, perhaps when you're making your sourdough, which we'll end on in a moment, how do you look back at your career, Ian, and all the adventures, she says, that you've had? You've been to some extraordinary countries, you've experienced some amazing stories, many of them heartbreaking stories when you've been involved in emergencies and crises. But when that kid from that colliery village background looks back on that 24 years, did it just naturally evolve? And how do you look back on that career?
It's a fabulous career, and I had some incredible moments. And the thing about the diplomatic world is that, A, it's a lot tougher than people think. It's not just going to cocktail receptions. There is that. But when you've worked a 50-hour week and you've got to go to the, National Day for the 6th day in a row, it quickly wears off, believe me. But you get some fantastic opportunities, and you never know what's around the corner. We've got 9/11, we've got the Bali bombing. There's always something happens that changes the world. And it's a real privilege, actually, and an honour to be there to step up and help, because I always said that I was actually joined Her Majesty's diplomatic service. When I joined, I served my Queen more than I served my government, and I served my country. And I think when things happen, a working class kid, Dad was in the army, that feeling of public service has to be front and centre, because these are the moments that you live for in terms of being there to help in some small way when things go wrong. And I'll always cherish that. And then there's the random moments like taking the President of Indonesia shopping in Harvey Nichols for bed linen and singing a classic Thai love song to the current king of Thailand and a ballroom full of 400 well-dressed people and all those random things as well that you just would get in no other career.
I think there's a memoir in you somewhere, she says, if I'm allowed to say that. I know you do a lot of writing, but you've also joined the ranks of the podcasters. Tell me about your podcast and what that's about.
So I'm the Peacemonger. We have far too many warmongers around the world, particularly in the UK, but also in Europe as well, and the US. Obviously, under Donald Trump, so I became the Peacemonger, and I started a podcast in mid-January. And yeah, I'm already at 13,500 subscribers. I take an evidence-based, balanced view on politics, and I think my core theme is that we just need to get back to doing more diplomacy, because we've abandoned diplomacy for far too long, and actually we can't solve all of the world's problems by just bombing the life out of countries that we disagree with. We have to look for common ground in very, very difficult, tense circumstances with countries with whom we share little in common, but we still have to find a way to coexist, and that's the purpose of my podcast.
Just give us an example of one of the subjects that you've tackled on one of your episodes.
So I just did an episode yesterday. I've been away for a month preparing for the publication of my book on the siege of the all-tanker in the English Channel, which was a good military exercise by the Royal Marines, the RAF, and Navy, and so on and so forth. But it was completely meaningless because it would take out 0.008% of Russia's yearly export revenue. And this was a pure political stunt by Starmer. I don't support any of the political parties. I'm politically independent, have been for a very long time. But this was just a pure political stunt as he tries to cling on to power in the UK when everybody can see that he's completely toast and his time in number 10 is over. But so much of our foreign policy is driven by these little stunts where our prime minister or minister wants their moment in the sun. They're going to do something to strike Putin or to bear down on the Iranians or to deal with Xi Jinping in China. So much of this governs our policy, and it's just terrible because we're making ourselves increasingly irrelevant on the world stage through these petty stunts that everybody can see are stunts. So that's my latest episode, just out yesterday.
Oh, I'm definitely going to listen. So where do we find the Peacemonger? Are you on Spotify and Apple and all the usual platforms?
I'm just on YouTube at Ian Proud, the Peacemonger. So yeah, you can find me there. I'm still quite new into this. I've got 13,500 subscribers already, but I need to get onto the Apple and all those things. But I'm so busy that I need a producer. I need to find some of my friends already have producers. I need a producer, someone who can help me manage the tidal wave of work.
I'll have a look through my contacts book afterwards, and you definitely do need a producer. Let's see if we can find you somebody.
Thank you, Helen.
When I found out about you and your book and everything, I loved the fact that the email I got asking whether I would like to interview you for the podcast, it just had really a fun facts section on. And it had all sorts of things, like you're a black belt and a Super Strictly fan. But one of the things that struck me was that you're a bit of a baker, aren't you? Tell me about your sourdough and your starter, and has your starter got a name?
Its starter doesn't have a name. Big Bake Off for Superfan as well, by the way, FYI. Nigella's in this year, can't wait. But when we got back from Moscow, there's something humble about actually having a culture that you created yourself. I should give it a name.
I'm surprised it hasn't got a name. Maybe you could call it Helen.
I'll call it Helen, yeah. I'm going to
put bad. Helen.
But when we got back, so we live in the countryside, there's something humble about having a culture that you've created yourself. I just got 50 grams of flour and 50 millilitres of water in this jar with the lid open, left it in the greenhouse for a few hours. And then the process started then. And it's the same culture for the past 7 years since we moved back. And my kids love our focaccia that I make. Pizzas, I want a croissant. I make a loaf every kind of 3 days when one runs out. But the thing is, it's all about patience and really, really being in tune with the different variables and make a good sourdough loaf, because a loaf is only ready to bake when it's ready to bake, and you can't rush it. And there's a bit of a parable there of life of just letting things take their time, develop as they should develop, and then just being ready when they're ready.
And do you find just great pleasure out of it? And I'm guessing you've probably had a few accidents along the way with it, or not so good loaves, but is it just a really therapeutic, relaxing thing to do where you can switch your mind off?
It is indeed, because a loaf will take 24 hours minimum, longer in the winter. Get the culture out of the fridge, you feed it, wait for it to bubble up, start the process, put it in your little basket, put it in the fridge overnight. I've got this cast iron skillet thing with a lid on, which I bake it in. There's a whole process. There's a whole routine. If you've had PTSD, routine could be helpful. Healthy nuclear habits, getting into nuclear habits and routine can be really, really helpful. And there's a routine element. There's a kind of natural letting things develop element. Yeah, it's very, very therapeutic.
It's been fascinating to hear just some of your stories. I'm sure you've got many more to tell. And I do know that you hate sitting for any length of time, so I'm going to release you from the studio now. You've been a really fascinating guest, Ian, and it's really refreshing, I think, to see such honesty and openness from someone who's had a fine and glittering career in really important matters like you have. So thank you. I think you're a wonderful human being.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the comfortable sofa, which has made the sitting much more bearable,
Nice,
in addition to your sparkling company.
Yes, and enjoy Helen, your starter.
I'm going to call it Helen.
Are you really going to call it Helen?
I'm going to call it Helen.
That does mean that I have to sample one of your loaves at some point.
I'm going to send you a photograph of
you
Helen.
can send me a loaf if you like. That would be great.
I'll take you up on that.
You've been listening to former British diplomat of 24 years and now author, she says, clutching his paperback book here, Ian Proud, talking about his extraordinary career in crisis management, including, of course, the aftermath of the Boxing Day Tsunami and the reasons behind he put pen to paper to write his first novel, Searching. Download and subscribe to our series at convex.podbean.com or search The Convex Conversation on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to yours. I'll be back next week with another great guest. Join me then.